So every year I take a look and see, okay, when's the last time I preached from Matthew? When's the last time I preached from Luke, from John, from Isaiah? What can we, because we're doing the Advent season again. And this year I came up with a series that we will be taking a look at called The Supporting Cast of Advent. I want to bring to the forefront some of the characters, some of the people in the story that don't always get a full look. And so we're going to begin this morning with the Magi, and next week we will look at Herod. The week after that, we will look at Simeon, and then Anna, and then finally on Christmas Eve, we will focus on the shepherds themselves. Those were the ones I picked. You could have picked some other ones because there's a few others as well, but I thought we would do that. And so we will begin in Matthew with these verses, chapter 2, 1-2, and 9-12. By way of an introduction, I wanted to talk a little bit about supporting actors and actresses, whether in the movies or in Emmys on television. And some of the ones that jumped out at me, looking at the list of winners of the Best Supporting Actor and Actress, were way back in 1947 when Edmund Gwenn won for Miracle on 34th Street playing Kris Kringle. Figured I had to add that one in, given the time of year. In 74, when De Niro won for Victor Corleone in Godfather 2, or posthumously in 2008 when Heath Ledger won for the Joker in The Dark Knight. For actresses, the ones that jumped out at me scanning the list were when Patty Duke won in 1962 playing Helen Keller in The Miracle Worker when she was only 15. In 1990, when Whoopi Goldberg won for Oda Mae Brown in Ghost, just because that is such a crazy performance, and that was one of my sister's favorite movies growing up, so I've seen it too many times. Or when Anne Hathaway won in 2012 playing Fantine in Les Mis. On the acting side, on the TV side, I picked the comedies. I thought that was more interesting than the dramas or the other categories because there's a little bit of a competition. And the most Emmys ever for Best Supporting Actor or Actress in a comedy actually goes to Don Knotts. Don Knotts won 5 times playing Barney Fife on The Andy Griffith Show. Just behind him are John Larroquette, 4 times playing Dan Fielding on Night Court, David Hyde Pierce 4 times for Niles Crane on Frasier, and then on the women's side, both Rhea Perlman and Doris Roberts both won 4 times. Of course, Perlman for Carla Tortelli on Cheers and Roberts for Marie Barone on Everybody Loves Raymond. Those are some of my favorite shows anyway, so I'm happy to recognize their work. But we understand on those movies and on those TV shows the crucial role that supporting character sometimes plays in making it all work. And so that's why we're going to take a look at those supporting characters, the supporting cast in Advent, starting with the Magi. So turn to Matthew 2 or follow along on the screen. Beginning in verse 1, it says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea. And I know this is the first Sunday of Advent, but we're talking about something that happens after. But as you know, I will not be here because we'll be in Michigan for that Sunday. So we're going to talk about it today. It says, after Jesus was born. So our first members of the supporting cast at Advent don't make their appearance on stage, as it were, until the story has already reached its climax. So while many artistic expressions time the arrival of the Magi with the shepherds and the angels all in one scene, the reality is that they have their own scene. It's just a bit later. So if it were a stage play, this part of the story would be called the falling action. That's the portion that resolves what the climax reveals. So the climax, of course, is the birth of the Christ child, and this would be the resolution. So what does that mean? What happens next? That's the falling action. So Jesus has been born in Bethlehem. What happens next? We're told that it is also during the time of King Herod. And we'll return to Herod next week because he has a role, a villainous role, you already knew that, to play. For now, the reminder of King Herod will set the stage. That will give us some dissonance that occurs during our reading of the text today. This is a message of wonder and joy, but we know that Herod is out there. And it reminds us that at the same time there is danger that is not far off. So what happened after Jesus was born in Bethlehem during the time of King Herod? Well, it involves Magi. So there is a rich tradition built up around the Magi, or wise men as they are often known, or least accurately, kings. The text itself is very sparse. It doesn't even confirm that their number was 3. So it's little wonder that the gaps were filled in actually fairly early in church history with a number of traditions. In the West, the 3 are known as Melchior, Caspar, and Balthazar. The earliest reference to them with those names that survives, there might have been earlier ones, but that still exists, is an 8th century Latin manuscript. In the East, the Eastern Church, however, the names are different. In the Syrian Church, the number is different. That tradition says that there were 12 of them, 12 being, of course, a very biblically fitting number. So the text is silent, and the traditions vary. So our focus is going to shift away from who these men were to what they say and do. Let's focus in on that. And the first thing we know about that is that they're coming from the east. They enter the story from the east. In other words, from the direction of the rising sun, which could mean Arabia. It could mean the Parthian Empire, which is modern-day Iran, or it could be even as far as India. Perhaps they knew each other and traveled together. Perhaps they met along the way from different cultures and countries. We don't know. Either way, they are traveling west with a purpose. And that purpose leads them to Jerusalem. The purpose directed the Magi to Jerusalem. Now, that is not a natural waypoint on the trade routes. One needs to go up to Jerusalem, basically from north, south, east, or west. It is not a natural destination. You go to Jerusalem when Jerusalem is where you want to go. So they must have thought, this is the right place. This is where we need to be. So when these men come to Jerusalem, they asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? Thus we see why the Magi came to Jerusalem. It is the historic seat of the dynasty of King David. For the past 500 years, however, that throne has been sitting vacant. Now, others have ruled. There have been kings, just not one in the line of David. Foreign empires have ruled, beginning with the Babylonians, then the Persians, then the Seleucids, who were the heirs of Alexander's empire in this area, and then, of course, the Romans. The Jewish people themselves even had one brief period in the midst of all of that when the Hasmonean dynasty, the ones descended from the Maccabees, they threw off the yoke of the Seleucids. But in the end, Jerusalem has had little to celebrate in its kings for many, many generations. In fact, the Jews currently have a king, and not one that they chose, not one that they wanted, in Herod. We'll learn about him next week. All that to say that this question coming in this place constitutes an unexpected plot twist. The kind that would have made a contemporary audience gasp. So if you were sitting in a first century audience and this was the play that was happening, and these Magi, these mysterious Magi come from the east, and they ask, "Where is the King of the Jews?" The audience would have gasped. They would have been like, that would have been a big deal. And then they say, "We saw his star when it rose." And of course, we have so many questions about that. How did they know that this particular star was significant? There's a lot of stars out there, and they're doing all sorts of stuff. And there's comets, and there's planets, and there's supernovas. There's all sorts of stuff happening if you study the night sky long enough. Why did they find this particular star to be significant? And then once they did, why did they think that it pointed them to a new king? What made them think, the star means a king? And once they made that leap, that conclusion, why did they think that that king had anything to do with the Jewish people? There's a whole bunch of questions that we would love to have answered. Unfortunately, the details are a mystery to us because the text doesn't tell us. It just simply gives us their conclusion. The Magi did indeed reach this conclusion based upon an astrological event. Something that they saw convinced them that they needed to follow the star to find a Jewish king. Whether they individually came to that conclusion or collectively, we don't know. But an important new king has arrived, and they have decided to do something about it. And that is this: we have come to worship him. Now, we know who the king is that they're seeking, so worship seems like an apt choice. It makes all the sense in the world. It would have also meant sense to them, even though they don't know who the king is, because paying homage to royalty is a cultural expectation. We may have a "I don't bend the knee to anyone" kind of attitude as Americans, right? We've got our "don't tread on me" flags and all of that kind of stuff. But that idea didn't exist in the ancient world, all right? If you saw that a Spartacus right back in the day and thought, that's the way it was back then, that's not really, those are modern ideas. If a king arriving was important enough that the heavens herald him with the movement of the stars, anyone wise enough to notice that would absolutely take advantage of the opportunity to be among the first to honor him and to bow in worship. That would have been not a shocking idea at all. This was expected. This was proper. So we're going to skip a little bit because the next part is about Herod, and his focus will be next week. So after Herod does his thing, after they heard the king, they went on their way. So for now, we'll skip over how Jerusalem responded to the extraordinary news of the Magi. Suffice it to say, they received their answer to the question in the form of an old prophecy that pointed them just a few miles south to Bethlehem. It's not far at all. And the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. So whatever this star was doing, now it confirmed for them the change of direction from west to south, and even pointed to an end of their journey. So they are 99% of the way there. They've been traveling many miles. Now they're only a half day away. How will they feel about that? It says when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. They felt like we all do when the journey is nearly over. Now I know that's how Clara feels, knowing that the drive to Michigan that we just took on Monday, or the drive back that we took yesterday, is coming to an end. She always is asking, how much further, right? It's on the screen on the TV, on the screen on the car, tells her how many more miles, how many more minutes till we get there. And she likes to count them down, less than an hour, right? That kind of thing. You probably have felt that way on a long drive too. Of course, the difference between our car ride, where the GPS is telling us exactly how much longer, is that the Magi have no guarantee when they set out, perhaps weeks ago, that they're going to find a king at the end of this at all. Maybe they're mistaken. Maybe it's beyond the sea. Maybe they'd come to the shore of the Mediterranean and realize it's still way further. They don't know. Now they know, because a power from the heavens is directing their steps. They realize we are at the end of the journey, and they are overjoyed. Verse 11 says, on coming to the house, right? This is where our nice, neat nativity scene, like the one we have down front here, with everyone at the same time in the same place, runs into the reality of how the narrative unfolded. By the time the Magi are able to arrive, the scene has shifted from that makeshift manger to a house. It's been days, maybe a few weeks, maybe even a month or more, since the shepherds and the angels left. Perhaps a normal routine has developed in this family. That was one of the conversations at my parents' house this week with my nephew and their new baby. Is Gwendolyn sleeping through the night? How is she doing? How is that working for you? Suffice it to say, at a little less than 6 months, she's already sleeping through the night, so they are way winning. The first-time parents, they've got it easy because it's working for them in that respect. So maybe that routine has already started to form for Mary and Joseph, first-time Mother Mary, learning how to handle an infant. And of course, that routine is very much appreciated when you have a newborn, whatever normalcy you can get. So they've come to the house. Says they saw the child with his mother Mary. Until this moment, the Magi had been seeking to connect to the hero around which this heavenly sign has unfolded. And now they are here. Mary holds the infant Jesus, God in the flesh, a wonder never before seen, never before imagined. In their own roles back home, the Magi may have been a big deal, and they probably were. Learned men who had knowledge of the heavens. They were probably very much respected back home. But here they see that someone much more important is here. And how will they respond to that? It says they bowed down and worshiped him. They respond with wisdom and humility. You know, see, some people would rather be a big fish in a small pond. They prefer to embrace that pride. Even when it's clear, hey, there's a bigger world out there, they'd rather stay where they are. These Magi, whether they were 3 or more or less, we don't know, doesn't matter. They are not held back by pride. They could see that one greater was right here in front of them. And yielding to that wisdom, they paid him the homage he was due by bowing before him. The Magi were cast in a supporting role. They willingly embraced that old adage, there are no small parts, only small actors. They chose to play their given role to its fullest. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They had symbolic and valued gifts to lay before the newborn king, so they gave them. How much of a sacrifice these gifts were for them, we cannot guess, but they gave them. It was fitting and proper for them to do it. We too have roles to play in God's plans. Some a big role, some a small role. Some a recognized role, some a role that goes by unnoticed. But all a servant's role. And all of us have gifts that we can lay before the King of Kings. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So the Magi fulfilled their purpose, and when it was accomplished, they returned to their previous lives, no doubt wiser, and with an incredible story to tell. 3 things to help us understand this text. Number one, the most memorable and most impactful tasks in God's redemptive story are at times given to those with supporting roles. And we can think about those. There's so many great examples in Scripture of someone that God brings to the forefront and gives a huge, important task to. Number two, this requires humility, dedication, and a generous spirit. Lastly, so let us each do our part. Let us serve with all, that is a typo there. I'll have to read from my handwriting. That's a different risk. So let us each do our part. Let us serve with all we have as we too lay our treasures at the feet of Christ.